Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the South Jersey Shore, a welcoming and inclusive faith community. We'd like to welcome any guests we have today. Thank you for taking the chance to join us in worship. My name is Diane Dreby, and I am your worship associate this morning. I'm a member of this congregation and currently serve on the membership committee. Our worship service today is led by guest speaker, Reverend Ranwa Hammamy. Reverend Ranwa, she, serves as the executive director of the Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry of California, which supports UUs around the state in their various justice ministries by providing advocacy, education, and witness opportunities to live out our UU values. Ranwa has previously served as president of, acronym DRUM, Diverse and Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, a national organization for UU people of color. A self-described UU Muslim, Ranwa seeks to serve both living traditions in her ministry, encouraging others to both grow and learn from each other's gifts. When not working, Ranwa enjoys spending time baking absurd concoctions, singing in a community choir, and relaxing with their spouse and 5 fur babies. Welcome, Ranwa. Video of the service will be available on our website and Facebook page later today. If you care to tweet during today's service, you can use the hashtag UUCSJS. If you are joining from a computer or smartphone, you're encouraged to type any joys or concerns in the chat box area on your screen. In most platforms, it can be accessed by a chat icon either at the top or bottom of the page. And the chat section will open where you can leave a comment and see what others share. Please remember that this video will be on the internet, so do not share information best kept private. Welcome to worship. Welcome into this place of healing. Welcome into this place of challenge and of growth. Welcome into this place of imperfection and aspiration. You are whole in your brokenness. You are holy in your shame. You are wholly loved as you are. Please join me in a moment of reflection as I light our chalice with these words from BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100. We are the children of the ones who did not die. We are the children of the people who could fly. We are the children of the ones who persevered. We are fearless. We are strong. And we're ready to carry on. Please join in singing along where you are, our gathering hymn, Wake Now My Senses.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in awe. Keep with the web of creation you'll find. Giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
Good morning, all. It is such a joy to be here with you this morning, and my gratitude to all of you who are working behind the scenes to make this beautiful worship happen. Y'all probably know this, but there's some fierce folks doing some tech ministry on this worship today. But for our time for all ages this morning, I have a couple of questions. Show of hands for those of you who have your video on. Who here has heard of Martin Luther King Jr.? Who here has heard of Malcolm X? Who here has heard of Rosa Parks? Who here has heard of Angela Davis? All right, we've got some hands on that one. That's great. All right. Well, for those of us who have heard of these folks, we know that some of the things that they have fought for, they've fought for civil rights, they've fought for the rights of Black people and for Black people in this nation in particular, and for their liberation from systems of white supremacy and from racism that is deeply embedded in our systems and structures. And one of those people, that last person that I mentioned, where there were a lot of hands up, and it makes me really excited because she's a brilliant person, is Angela Davis. And so I just wanted to share some of her story for folks who may not know all of it. And it's going to be a teaser. 3 to 4 minutes is not enough to tell you about Angela Davis. But Angela Davis was born in 1944 in Birmingham, Alabama. And she was born in Alabama during the time when the Jim Crow laws, and for those of us who may not know what the Jim Crow laws are, those laws made segregation legal and outlawed a lot of activities for Black people and people of color and people who were not white. And so she was alive when those laws were sadly pretty strong and in effect. And, you know, she was a very smart child, Angela. She, even though the schools in her area were, for Black children weren't all that great, she thrived and she did so well that she was able to travel all around the country and all around the world for her education. She attended high school in New York, and then she went to college on a full scholarship in Massachusetts. She traveled to France and to Germany, learning and studying and learning so many new ideas about justice and liberation and what it means to transform our world so that everybody can not just survive, but thrive. She became part of a lot of actions and communities that were working for justice. Some of those communities folks would call radical. And the result of that was that in the 70s, when she was, or actually 1969, when she was a teacher back here in California, actually, UCLA, she was actually fired from her job because she was too radical. She was then a member of the Communist Party, and that was apparently a fireable offense. And so she was kicked out from her job. And then in 1970, she was actually wrongfully accused and arrested for crimes that she didn't commit. And so this became a rallying cry for people when Angela Davis was arrested and charged for these crimes that she didn't commit. Lots of people on the outside while she was in prison were rallying for her, including Aretha Franklin. When you have Aretha Franklin on your side, you know you're doing something right. And so she eventually was released from prison almost 2 years after she was arrested with no charges against her. And there were even songs released by the Rolling Stones and John Lennon honoring the work that she was doing and what the struggle that she had been going through. And so I talked a little bit about her life in the 60s and 70s, and the work that she was doing then and the work that she's doing now. She considers herself what is called a prison abolitionist. And who here, show of hands, has a nice sense of idea of what that is? Okay, a couple. Okay, all right, that's all right. So a prison abolitionist, what Angela Davis calls herself, is somebody that doesn't believe we need reform or changes to our prison system, but actually believes we need to get rid of it and to actually address the issues that are causing people of color, particularly Black and Latinx people, to be in situations where then they are incarcerated, where they are then put in prison. She believes that there are actual things beneath the surface in our systems and in our world and country that are the things we should be addressing, and we shouldn't actually be putting people in prison, but we should be supporting them so that they get to live full lives in relationship with one another. And she's been doing this work. She is still doing this work. She is in her 70s. She is loud. She is proud. She's here in Oakland, where I am this morning. And I love so much about what she does. And one of the things that she will always say, or often say, when she's asked about her work and her I consider it her ministry for justice and racial justice, she'll talk about an experience she had as a child where her parents, who were also transformative thinkers and justice makers, she said she learned as a child to live under segregation, but at the same time, simultaneously to live in an imagined new world and to recognize that things would not always be as they were. And so this morning, as we enter further into our worship, I invite you to hold the reality of the world that we are living in, and hold the possibility of the world we know we can create together.
During this next musical interlude, thank you, Ranwa, that was beautiful. We invite you to write your joys and sorrows in the chat portion of your Zoom screen. The icon will either be on the top or bottom of the screen and will allow you to enter text into the panel where others can see it. At the end of the musical interlude, I will read what you would share with the congregation gathered here today. Separated as we are by distance, we are joined this morning in spirit, brought together to seek comfort and encouragement and to share those things in our lives that bring us joy or cause us sorrow. I will now read aloud for all listening what you would share. From Sheila, I am deeply disturbed by the White House attempting to portray Black Lives Matter as a hate group. Thank you, Matt, from Barbara Miller, for your tech ministry. From Jeff, thank you, Katie. And from Judy, on the lighter side of life, very happy to get a haircut. And from Karen, sorry that my Aunt Muriel passed away last Sunday. Sorry, Karen. Okay. Now, Reverend Ranwa will lead us now in the spirit of prayer.
I invite all of you to take a breath together and breathe it out together as we join together in a spirit of prayer. Blessed and holy creation, universe of wonder, mystery beyond definition and name, we share today all of our joys and sorrows, spoken and unspoken, longing for the time when as a community we can once more gather in physical space and place stones in water and bask in the warmth and light of our chalice. Our hearts are touched by physical and shared ritual, and we are connected virtually across the state of New Jersey. Blessed and holy creation, source of life, hold in our hearts all who are working to transform our world in love, working to transform our world with compassion and moving us towards justice. Celebrate with those of us who find joy in the smallest things, who find those glimmers of celebration and possibility in our lives during these troubling times. Hold in our hearts those of us who continue to grieve and mourn, who continue to lose beloved in this world where it is that much harder to experience that loss. Hold in our hearts the members of the Sioux Nation in South Dakota, the water protectors and indigenous people of this land who persist and resist and can lead the way for our earth's healing and our healing as a society. Hold in our hearts the over 130,000 who have been killed by the pandemic of COVID-19 in this country alone, and the countless more whose lives have been touched. Pray for all of those essential workers who continue to make our world rotate and our lives as comfortable as possible in this time of discomfort and challenge. Hold in our hearts the people in our world and institutions. Protect the people in our world and institutions who are trying to create good and transform our systems from within. People like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Pray for all of us, those who are apart from us, whether by distance, time, or conflict unresolved. We pray for those who thirst, whether for water, dignity, or justice. We pray for our small, blue, fragile, resilient planet. And in this time of prayer and community together, we offer all of these joys and sorrows that live in our hearts, and we offer them into the care of our universe. May our joys be multiplied and our sorrows diminished in this sharing. Amen.
We now take a moment to give and receive the morning offering. that looks and feels a little different than when we are separated by distance. Rather than placing a check or cash in the basket, I ask you to consider a generosity practice of sending a check to our P.O. box or arranging a regular payment be sent through your bank. You can also use the donate button on our website to make a contribution. Each Unitarian Universalist congregation is self-supporting, and your financial support is essential since 80% of our income to support all the programs, everything we do, comes from the contributions of our members and friends. We hope you will make a contribution at whatever level you feel comfortable with, and remind you that no matter how those gifts are offered, they are always most gratefully received. Thank you.
Our reading today is a piece called Hajar Writes a Letter to Sarah as a cathartic exercise suggested by her therapist. At the end of the reading, we will enter a time of quiet contemplation before today's sermon. Dear Sarah, life made us enemies, but it doesn't have to be that way. What if we both ditched the old man? He could have visitation rights with the boys, alternate weekends and holidays, especially the Feast of the Sacrifice. He took that day anyway, forgetting it was about me in the desert, watching my baby dehydrate near to death. Anyhow, you and I, we'd set up house, raise the kids, start a catering business maybe. You have brains, so do I. We could travel. There are places to see besides Ur and the Nowheresville desert with its tribes of hooligans. No, your lips thin when you disapprove, like the mother I almost remember from before I wound up in your house. I was barely more than a girl. You used to laugh then. In those days, you could stand to look at me. We even hugged sometimes. Oh, Sarah, you need years of therapy. Can't you admit that what he did was wrong? Be angry at him for just 1 second. You don't have to be angry forever, just long enough to know the world won't fall apart, long enough to pity him, yourself, me. Laugh, Sarah, laugh. Imagine. God, the possibility. Sincerely, love, Hajar.
So first, an apology. I apologize for the change that is going to be this sermon, but I'm actually not going to draw on the Harry Potter text for this service. In light of the harmful and transphobic comments recently made by J.K. Rowling, I've wrestled with and decided not to bring her works into this pulpit, a sacred space. While I and others are personally of the mind that the world of Harry Potter and the community of love and creativity that have resulted from those writings do not belong solely to this transphobic individual, the recent nature of her latest transphobic philosophies in the context of our increasingly legislative violence against trans folks in this country has led me to put aside the world of Harry Potter for the moment, for my sake and the sake of my trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming siblings. That being said, for those who are familiar with the stories and the love that they embody and have fostered, Hermione Granger lives on in this Hufflepuff heart as the strongest leader of the resistance, and one day I plan to celebrate her again. Now, my choice to shift my focus away from the creative work of someone who is doing real harm actually feels appropriate for the world we are living in right now. I recently heard someone call the year 2020 the Great Reckoning, because our societies and our institutions are being called to acknowledge essential, challenging truths about our past and the impact they have on our present and future. And in this 2020, the Great Reckoning, we're being invited and challenged to re-examine the stories we tell about our history, the narratives we glorify and memorialize, and the experiences, history, and stories that have been denied through erasure, sugarcoating, and genocide. There is a whole side to our collective story, the story of our world, our country, our humanity that has gone unacknowledged. And in this great reckoning, we are being invited to do the hard work of learning those stories so that all of us can begin to undo and heal from the harm that they continue to cause. And one of the basic ways we're being invited into this learning and healing work, this hard, holy work, is to really listen to and amplify the stories and experiences that have not been historically centered or even told. We are being asked to appreciate that the majority narrative that many of us grew up in doesn't tell the whole story, and that there are so many more perspectives out there that complexify and expand our collective tale. Now, this is a practice and a way of learning and engaging that was lifted up in a lot of my classes in seminary and has led to some of the most powerful liberation theologies and faith practices to date. And so that's what I'm hoping to do with you this morning, to complexify and expand our collective story with perspectives our world doesn't frequently center and is sometimes even vilified. As Diane shared in our welcoming this morning, I am a Unitarian Universalist Muslim, and I love how those traditions dance together. And one of the majority narratives that I grew up in was the model and ever-perseverant faith of Ibrahim, or Abraham in the Judeo-Christian context. Between him and the Prophet Muhammad, it's a tight race between which one of them got the most attention from my teachers in my Muslim Sunday school classes growing up. But like I said, today isn't about their stories. It's about one that, particularly in Western discourse, we don't pay that much attention to. Hajar, or Hagar in the Judeo-Christian context, is more often than not described through the lens of her relationship to Abraham and the ways in which she and their child were presented as tests of his faith. But she is so much more than that. A reality that Black womanist theologians in the Christian traditions, like Dolores Williams, have been lifting up for several generations. And a reality that Muslima feminists and liberation theologians have also described in their engagement and breaking open of the Islamic tradition. Now, in the Judeo-Christian tellings of the story, Hagar is described as being anywhere from a slave to a second wife to a surrogate mother when Sarah is not able to conceive a child with Abraham. In the Islamic traditions, the same range of possibilities exists, with more emphasis being placed on the second wife story. And as the majority narrative around Hajar's story in the Islamic traditions go, she was married to Ibrahim, as was Sarah. And Hajar was the first to have a child in that relationship. And then, when her son was still an infant, something happened that would change the course of Hajar's life. According to majority narratives in the Islamic tradition, Abraham, was told by God to bring Hajar and their infant child to a barren spot in the desert and leave them there. The story, as I was taught as a child, was that when Abraham then turned to leave after bringing them to the desert, Hajar asked him, "Why are you leaving us here? Why are you leaving us here?" repeatedly. And Ibrahim, he didn't respond. It was only when she asked him, "Did God tell you to bring us here?" did he reply, "Yes." And to which Hajar then responded, "Then go, God will protect us." Now, I have some questions about that part of the story, as I imagine some of you do as well, and trust me, we'll get there. Eventually, the little bit of water that Hajar and her son had ran out, and soon she couldn't provide milk for her child. I can't begin to imagine what Hajar felt like in that moment, thirsty and with her hungry child wailing in her arms. But what happens next in the story does tell me a little bit about what she was thinking when she said, "God will protect us." She began to search for water in the desert, running between two large hills, an activity that is actually honored and reenacted by some Muslims on holy pilgrimage every year. She searches for any sign of water or nourishment that will help her and her child survive. She searches, and eventually she finds water right next to her infant son's heel. Now, what Hajar did in that moment of discovery demonstrates her imagination, creativity, and foresight. She not only drank from that spring of water and gave her child water, she created a well around that spring of water, preserving its presence and maintaining access to its life force. And then when travels eventually passed through, she was able to trade water for supplies to survive in that previously desolate spot. And as a result of that ingenuity, creativity, and foresight, she thrived. Travelers soon not only passed through the spot where she and her son had found themselves, they stayed. A town, an entire city grew in that spot. A city that began when one woman, one single mother, one person of faith acted, created, and imagined in spite of the odds that she was facing. And the name of that city, as some of you may have figured out or might already know, is Mecca. Now, this part of Hajar's story, it's messy and it's complicated, and in the wrong hands can be used to cause harm. And in the right hands, it makes an incredibly powerful statement. So yeah, I wasn't there when Abraham left Hajar and her son in the desert. But what I like to imagine is that Hajar embodied an attitude that was captured by our reading from Mojekov today. The second she found out that Abraham thought it was God that told him to leave a woman and her child in the desert, I love her reaction. I love imagining it being the equivalent of like, boy, bye. I am better off without you, and I've got something better looking out for me. I like to imagine that in that middle of that fear and that confusion of being left potentially to die in the desert, that she is unapologetic in her anger at how Abraham has treated her, and then just says, go, knowing that there is a greater promise of protection that she knows deep down she is worthy of. But here's the thing. And that knowledge of God's promise of protection, Hajar doesn't make herself a passive victim waiting to be saved in these circumstances. She acts, rooted in her anger, rooted in her faith, her fear, her creativity, and knows that to experience that promise of God's protection, she is responsible for helping to create it. Her faith doesn't tell her to wait. Her faith tells her to act. And because of it, she not only finds and creates the tools to survive in the desert, she innovates. She provides for herself and her child. She makes connections. She builds a mutually supportive community and early mutual aid network in the desert that allows not only herself, but many more to eventually call this spot home. When Hajar told Abraham to go because God would protect her and her child, she wasn't a woman submitting to abandonment. She was a woman who chose to live into her greatest capacity for resilience, creativity, imagination, and hope. And in our reading this morning, Moshe Kaf imagines Hajar going yet one more step further in her creativity and resilience. She imagines what Hajar could have imagined, a better world. And not only a better world, but a path towards living it, inviting Sarah, another of Abraham's wives in this complicated patriarchal system, to join her. Out of that pain and that anger, she still knew it doesn't have to be that way. Hajar writes this letter to Sarah about their circumstances, naming both truths that challenge and possibilities that invite. What if we both ditched the old man? We could travel, start a catering business. You have brains, so do I. You don't have to be angry forever, just long enough to know the world won't fall apart. Imagine God. Imagine the possibility. Today's sermon title includes the word prophecies. And prophets are those who speak truth, who name those challenging truths and those invitations to possibility. And Hajar, for me, her life is a prophecy. And her narrative, her story, invites us to ask the question, where are the Hajars, the living prophecies of our time? Where are the people who, despite the circumstances they have been placed in, hold on to and act on their faith in innovative and transformative ways? Where are the Hajars of today who do not hide their anger at injustice, but claim their worthiness for protection and life? Who name those truths that challenge and imagine the possibilities that invite? One of them was the focus of our Time for All Ages, Angela Davis. We know that she was a warrior, and she still is a warrior for justice, and that she was targeted, ostracized, and even criminalized for her prophetic role in the civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s. And though she faced the possibility of a life in prison or even execution in the early 1970s, she was eventually released from prison and continued her work, her life's work, to defund the police, abolish prisons, and transform our criminal justice system. Her work and the work of her fellow organizers in the Black Panther Party are reminders that today's loud and proud demands across the country to defund the police, abolish prisons, and put those resources back into community, those aren't new. We are just now in a place where those prophetic ideas that were rejected and whose advocates were persecuted, those ideas can now not only enter, but rightfully dominate the public discourse around civil rights, justice, and social transformation. And Angela Davis today, like many others, continues to offer the truths that challenge and the possibilities that invite, lifting up that the true power of this moment is in those mass movements and collectives that have been doing the work of creating liberation together for generations. And now those movements are finally getting the attention and impact that they deserve. In a 2014 interview, Davis offers the challenging truth: I don't think we can rely on governments, regardless of who is in power, to do the work that only mass movements can do. I think what is important about the sustained demonstrations that are happening now is that they are having the effect of refusing to allow these issues to die. Davis goes on to say that these mass movements bring about awareness and change. They are led by the people who are defining and fighting for their own liberation, not by institutions or single figureheads in leadership. I think we might have found our hajrs of today. And what makes them so effective, what makes them our hajrs of today, is not just their numbers, but it's their imagination. Davis reminds us in 2013, she says, regimes of racial segregation were not disestablished because of the work of leaders and presidents and legislators, but rather because of the fact that ordinary people adopted a critical stance in the way in which they perceived their relationship to reality. See, these movements of ordinary people then and now, they didn't just sit in the desert and die. Like Hajjaj, they dared to imagine a different way and to challenge the allegedly unchallengeable. Davis continues, social realities may have appeared inalterable, impenetrable, they came to be viewed as malleable and transformable. And people learned how to imagine what it means to live in a world that was not so exclusively governed by the principle of white supremacy. She offers the Black Panther Party's 10-point program as a concrete example of truths that challenge and possibilities that invite, because it identified clear racial disparities and atrocities experienced by Black and oppressed people in America, and the pathways to transforming them into just ways of community. And I truly believe that Davis's decades-long advocacy and the advocacy of mass movements for the abolition of prisons and dismantling of police systems, they have persisted for so long in spite of everything because they are rooted in what is possible. If we say we can't abolish prisons, we have cut off our imagination. We have cut off our faith, our creativity, our justice, without giving them a fighting chance. But to help us along the journey of imagination and justice, Davis reminds us we don't have to limit ourselves to one singular solution, but let ourselves play with, quote, a constellation of alternative strategies and institutions, a continuum of alternatives to imprisonment that include enhancements to schools, education, healthcare, and a justice system rooted in restorative justice, not punitive vengeance. I don't know about you, but my resilience and my faith is instantly buoyed by the idea of thinking about the myriad of tangible, concrete possibilities that these mass movements are inviting us to, that these mass movements are actively creating, rather than the singular impossibility that can so easily shut down our hearts, minds, and spirits. Imagine God. Imagine the possibility. We sang in our hymn this morning, "Wake now my senses to hear the earth call. Wake now my vision of ministry clear." Today, we are being called by the living prophecies that are the mass movements of liberation creators, of the Black Lives Matter movement, who are not a hate group, but a love group. We are being called by the voices of Black youth. We are being called by the voices of our elders and our ancestors to name challenging truths and to invite into possibility. So how do we do it? We create our communities together, virtually, in safe physical space when we can. We come together and we learn from those voices that have been silenced and oppressed for so long, who are rising up and saying enough. I believe some of you have heard about this text, widening the circle of concern. We do the work in our own communities. This report issued by the UUA's Commission on Institutional Change offers pathways for how we can address in our own UU spaces and homes the oppression that still lives, so that our sacred spaces become models of prophecy. Connect with your local organizers. Connect with those Movement for Black Lives chapters, Black Lives Matters chapters. Connect with your state action network in New Jersey. I would be remiss as the leader of one of our state action networks to not say that. You've got one in New Jersey if you're not already connected. Do that work locally. And it's not perfect, but join that UU the vote effort, because even though our democracy leaves something to be desired, we are still able to reduce harm by voting and voting love this election season. We are in uniquely challenging, isolating, and frightening times. Not going to sugarcoat that. But we can persevere through this and create through this if we remember the strengths of our collective, the resilience of our roots, the possibilities and imaginations that grow, that flourish and thrive when we open ourselves up to new narratives and stories. Yes, these are uniquely challenging, isolating, and frightening times, and is one of the most creative moments of our lives. If we are willing to open ourselves up to the truth that this moment holds and the possibilities that this moment invites. We are the Hajars of our time. We can become the living prophecies that know another way is here if we commit ourselves to creating it. May it be so.
Our closing words are from Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds. I am not afraid of what I came here to do. I'm made of stardust. We are not afraid of what we're called now to do. We're all made of God. Let's read the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Now please enjoy our musical postlude.
Mm-hmm. children who quest for the truth. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take us your neighbor, both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end.
Please take the opportunity to keep virtually connected. Read dates off graphics supplied. Oh, sorry, that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so we have a graphic coming up. So some of the things going on, Sunday worship on Zoom at 10 a.m. We've all been here. RE Learning Lab on Tuesday for our children and youth with Miss Jess at 3. Thursdays, Common Arts for Do-It-Yourself Hearts at 7. And all makers and all ages welcome. Other events, we have Still Singing on Wednesdays with Barbara Miller and the choir. All are welcome. That's Wednesdays in July, the 1st, the 15th, the 29th at 6:45. Family Fun Game Night, the 2nd and 4th Fridays of each month at 7. Buddhist Sangha is now on Tuesday evenings, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Tuesdays at 6:30, and then the last Saturday of the month at 10. And Heartfulness Meditation, Mondays and Wednesdays at 6:25, Thursday at 7:25, and Saturday at 7 a.m. Reverend Dawn is away for the month of July, but will return in August and will be available to provide pastoral counseling at that time. In the meantime, please reach out to our volunteer pastoral care team for support. We warmly welcome all who are visiting us today. Please stay and socialize in our online social time so that we can get to know each other better. Now let us share in a moment of silent reflection to consider what today's message and the meaning it has in our lives. And I just want to thank Reverend Ranwa for that beautiful, I've been feeling a little frustrated, maybe a little defeated, and that was helpful because we aren't going to make any progress that way. So thank you.